Hello, good evening and welcome to PM Express. Now, although the heightened tension experienced during the December 2012 elections has subsided, WANEP, the West African Network for Peace Building, says there still exists uncertainty and anxiety about the outcome of the presidential election petition at the Supreme Court of Ghana. The existence of increasing numbers of meetings of politically affiliated groups of the parties in court who act as pressure and accountability groups is becoming a worrying phenomenon. While noting the dynamics in resolving the election dispute, the victor positions and public pronouncements by members of the key parties in court has the tendency to create mistrust in the process, discredit the outcomes and institutions, as well as promote the potential for violence across the country. This is just a portion of the introduction of the National Human Security Early Warning Brief of Ghana One, that is by WANEP for January to March 2013. This is what we're going to discuss tonight. We're going to look at this Human Security Early Warning Brief put together by WANEP, and then we'll discuss that in relation to the political activities that are ongoing now, including, as you may know already, the election petition that is ongoing at the Supreme Court, for which by courtesy of the media, we're able to watch live. So we'll take a break, and don't forget, you can join us on this show by your text and comments 1760, and then you can post your Facebook comments on our Facebook wall. If you are active on Twitter as well, you can send us a tweet. Our handle is at Joy News on TV. So we'll take a break, and when I return, I will introduce my guest for tonight. Stay with us. Welcome back to PM Express. Tonight I have with me in the studio Emmanuel Bombande, who is the Executive Director of the West African Network for Peace Building, WANEP. It's great to have you here, Emmanuel Bombande.
Thank you, and nice to see you again.
Yes, nice to see you always. Now, I know that there is the tendency that as the Supreme Court case progresses, and the attention that it is receiving in the media, there is the great likelihood that everything else will be pushed aside, especially when it comes to media coverage, and then we'll begin to lose sight of the other issues which are important. Now, WANEP has released this National Human Security Early Warning Brief for the first quarter.
Yes.
What were your considerations? What is this report really about?
First of all, let me appreciate this opportunity to put into context what this report is about. This report is published every quarter, and it is the contribution of civil society to the promotion of human security, and more importantly, how the analysis of human security is helping us to anticipate, detect, and prevent violent conflicts. In other words, we can no longer say we are not capable of anticipating what is likely going to happen. Once we have the right data and we can do the right analysis to be able to prevent before even violence becomes part of our communities. And so this report is the first quarter, as you rightly put it, January to March. Let me quickly add here that one of your sister media houses mislabeled or gave this a completely wrong title. And so on the Ghana web, it appeared as Ghana's security is at risk, WANEP. I want to use your platform to say that our report has never alluded to that. It has never suggested that, and we continue to appeal that the partnership with the media should help us to do the type of quality work that is very, very important for our country. But having made this clarification, what this report has always done, and that is why we underline human security, is to look at various threats that are likely going to undermine our collective security. And so the human security report is not just about the security of the state. Interestingly, last week, there were discussions about people who came out to talk about coup d'etats. And yet, the reason they associated that risk was about what they called the dissension in its generality in society. If you look at this report, you would understand why it becomes very, very important. Because the report is not just a research. Throughout Ghana, we have monitors in each region.
Okay.
We report, we collect the incidences that happen every day, and it is stored in a database. Now, these reports are open source reports. So when, for example, Joy FM is able to report that in Ashanti region, there was an armed robbery attack, and in the process, 2 people were killed. It is public information. And so it is collected and stored in the data based on the report.
Okay.
We are now able to use that to do so that is the quantitative aspect of collecting the data. But we are able to look at the trend qualitatively and make the analysis to produce a human security report. And the indicators range from accidents on our road, because human security ranges from our personal safety and protection to environmental security, to health security, to food security, and you name it. And so if you look at armed attacks, if you look at disasters, and during this quarter, we've had rainstorms, particularly in the northern region, that even led to the loss of life. And so we're able to collect that data. If you look at demonstrations and civil unrest, if you look at threats, if you look at physical assaults, even including sexual assaults, crimes, and other related threats, we collate all the data, and we're not able to use that data to do the analysis.
I mean, these threats,
this report.
These threats that you're elaborating. I mean, to what extent does one weigh than the other? For example, if you take armed attacks, which on the list we have Ashanti region 4, and then we compare that to demonstrations and civil unrest. How are you able to determine which one is weightier than the other in your determination of the risks?
Okay, so if we have been able to gather the information about demonstrations and civil unrest, we now want to look at a qualitative analysis of the source of those demonstrations. Now, the risk here is, are those demonstrations going to be sustained as a result of a particular grievance in society, or will those demonstrations not be sustained once the response to satisfy the demonstrations have been provided? And so, if you were to permit me, let me give a very quick example. Today in Guinea, since yesterday, there have been demonstrations, but those demonstrations have deep political undertones about the dissatisfaction of organizing legislative elections in June. And they will be sustained as long as the consensus about organizing those elections, who should do the biometric registration, what kind of dialogue is happening between the opposition and the ruling party for the elections to happen, those demonstrations should be sustained. Whereas in the case of Ghana, workers wore armbands in Ashanti gold fields and demonstrated because they wanted certain, so to speak, satisfaction from their employers. Now, we monitor that. The moment the employers are able to give a signal that will meet not 100% your demand, but some aspect of your demand, the likelihood that that demonstration is immediately going to go down is apparent. And so you cannot talk about that type of demonstration, which is also civil, to be sustained.
So what? I mean, the demonstrations that took place in Ghana recently, I mean, the strikes, I beg your pardon, the strikes.
Yes.
Are they also threatening?
Yes, they are threats. But those demonstrations were happening within the context of industrial relations. And so we record the incident of the demonstrations, but we now monitor the response that the different, whether the institutions of the state, whether their employer associations are dealing and responding to those demonstrations. And so what this does is to look at the threat, but to also look at the capacity of the state, whether the state as government or the state as other institutions of the state, in terms of their capacity to respond. Now, once we see the capacity to respond weighing more than the threat now begins to be insignificant as compared to how the threat now can go out of control, so to speak, and become a threat that would be threatening to personal safety, property, and lives. And so you are able to see, therefore, that with the consistent monitoring every day, it's not just about the quantitative data, but it's also about the monitoring, tracking of the qualitative analysis. And you are now able to produce a human security report. And so if you look at it in this way, you are now able to say that if, for example, there was an accident in January in the northern region, and 24 people were killed. Now, 24 lives have perished. The question then is, what are the institutions of the state, whether the Road Safety Management Commission, Ghana Road Safety Commission, Ghana Private Road Transport Union, the police, what are they doing in order that Ghanaians can be assured that when they get into a bus, they can arrive safely at their destination? So it's not just now the accident and the number of people dead, but it's also about the response to reduce that threat to human security. And that now becomes part of the qualitative analysis. So that you're able to monitor during the quarter whether the pervasiveness of Ghanaians dying on our roads is going to continue and increase correspondingly depending on the response to it, or where the response does not even exist at all, and where the increasing recklessness is pointing to that trend. Then you can say that in human security, when it comes to the safety of our roads, the likelihood is that we are going to see an increasing trend. So that the quarter now also gives you the possibility of projecting the next quarter.
Right. I mean, for this quarter, I know you have finished this quarter.
Yes.
I haven't had the opportunity to read the last quarter's report before this quarter.
That's right.
Tell me what the difference between that one and this one is, and whether you would say there are stronger indications for all of us to be worried for this quarter.
Thank you so much. Each quarter brings its unique peculiarities. In the last quarter, the anxieties that we were monitoring and the tensions around which we were contributing in terms of a response was about peaceful elections. And if you remember, we had very good discussions about elections in terms of before the elections,
and after
during the elections, and after the elections. And we are very happy that at the end of the day, we had peaceful elections. In this particular quarter, the peculiarity has been that out of those same elections, in terms of after the elections, one party has sought to go to the Supreme Court with a petition. And so we are monitoring how we are managing that petition within the purview of the indicators that we set ourselves to monitor
in the previous
quarter, when it now looks at post-election period. And that is why in this particular report, you have seen that we have pointed out to the anxieties that the Supreme Court process in itself have led to, and we have pointed exactly to the effect that it's not about the due process in the Supreme Court, but it is about the type of political activity that has tried to put pressure on the Supreme Court, to put pressure on judges, to put pressure in different ways that then constituted the anxiety and the tension. So that if violence was likely going to happen, it's not going to happen because Ghanaians do not know what to expect when you submit yourself to due process before the highest court of the land. It is rather the indiscipline and disrespect of the due process that we should all respect in the Supreme Court that now becomes the danger. So that what you then see happen is, out of that monitoring, we can advocate, we can appeal, we can do the peacemaking. And we work with our civil society components, counterparts who have expertise in different areas, so that comprehensively everybody then is responding to what we are able to detect as the problem for that particular quarter. So in response to your question, the peculiarity of this quarter obviously is the due process in the Supreme Court.
So what are the key indicators of this quarter's findings? What were your major findings which perhaps we should all look out for?
Now, in this quarter, we recorded a total of 96 incidents. And those incidents have been divided alongside the 10 regions. We have highlighted that the Greater Accra region, for example, recorded the highest number of threats. And some of these threats were violent incidents, followed by, and so there were 30 recorded incidents in the Greater Accra region, and in the Ashanti region there were 15, followed by 14 in the northern region. Now, these threats then range across the indicators that I've outlined. For example, if you look at armed attacks, we then segregate the attacks that were armed robbery attacks. But there were also threats related to communal violence in terms of chieftaincy. If you look, for example, at the Nakanduri area, we recorded incidences of threats. We recorded incidences of threats in the Nkonya and Alavanyo community. So that when you look at armed attacks, we then highlight where were these attacks happening. And to respond to your question, we break that down into their different components for the purpose of the analysis. So of the total recorded incidences, armed robbery attacks constituted 10.15%. Whereas threats related to the what we would call governance, politics, and the rule of law recorded 14.20%.
That's very high.
That's very high. And if you look at these threats, in the area of chieftaincy conflicts, there were 7.10%. But look at the highest percentage. The highest percentage were the threats as a result of disaster, and we recorded those disasters both natural and man-made. The natural were the rainstorms, but then the man-made were the motor accidents, and they constituted 32% of all these threats. And the other one was the physical attacks in terms of assault, and they were 10%. Then we had incidences of, for some reason, and it's good you are asking this question, we are pointing to an increasing worry and disturbance in what we call the crisis of our social fabric. Because we've recorded incidences of murder, including adults murdering children, including husbands murdering wives. They might be insignificant because the total of these amounted to, I have to also read my own report, 9.13%. We will want to follow this up. We want to monitor this and to ask ourselves, why are we seeing violence in our households in terms of what is unacceptable? Because the safety of our African traditions and our Ghanaian communities is in the family. Why are we beginning to see increasing violence in the family?
In the family.
And we need to monitor this and put that against the morality of our society, what is happening as a social crisis, and what must we do to mitigate that. So these are the breakdowns in terms of all these threats.
Right. So I mean, after you have written such a fine report, what then happens? I mean, you have given us the strongest indication that motor accidents, natural disasters, etc., consist of the highest threats so far. Yes. And then you also mentioned armed robbery, political, rule of law threats as well.
Yes.
Just mentioning, what then happens? I mean, what are the systems or mechanisms that must be put in place to ensure these things are checked or curbed?
We then look at the previous quarter. We look at where we made improvements. And it's very, very important that in the expertise of human security practice, peace building, and conflict prevention, we acknowledge and appreciate where we are making progress and draw the attention of people who must respond to where we are not making sufficient progress. So, for example, if you look at the last quarter and compare it to this quarter, though we recorded armed robbery incidents, they were less than the last quarter. So, at the end of the report, we commend, we appreciate and encourage the Ghana police, with the assistance of the Ghana Armed Forces, for their efforts in reducing armed robbery and encourage them to do more, because that's very, very important. Let's not forget that our institutions are made of people. Though they wear the uniform and we can easily say that it is their duty, they also want to appreciate that we recognize their work. And that's why with this report, we interface with them, we meet them, and we share the report with them. Then we now make recommendations of the areas that we saw that require the type of attention, whether the attention is urgent, whether it is the type of attention that must be mitigated. We try to do that. So, for example, in this quarter, because of the threats around industrial relations, we made a recommendation on government, tripartite bodies, unions, in the wake of rising labor agitations to ensure that services are provided while processes go on to address the issues that have been brought forward. This is particularly so because of the tendency of industrial and labor disputes to promote political instability also in the country. And the qualitative component of this analysis is the worry that you sometimes see industrial relations disputes, and yet in the analysis, people try to give it a political coloring. And so we think that when you are responding to the industrial issues, you can easily do that when you allow the institutions who are managing it to do so. But the moment you begin to color it politically, the tendency for it to become worse and become more difficult to mitigate becomes higher.
I know you said quite a lot of things, but if I put it in simple terms and asked you to tell us, I mean, ordinary Ghanaians, what the true security situation of our country is as of today, what would you say?
On hindsight, with this report that we knew we were going to publish this week, it is for that reason last week, our argument was very strong that Ghana's state of security is very strong and robust. But it does not mean there are no challenges. And this report has pointed out
the
challenges. But who should point to which country today aren't there challenges? Beginning with the superpower of the world, the United States, and ranging up to any country. Now, what is important, and your question brings that to the fore, is we are looking at what is the capacity of Ghana to rise up and respond to those challenges.
But do we have capacity?
And so we look at each of the components in terms of capacities. For example, we are happy that the Ghana police is demonstrating through their physical presence. And by the way, this is not just because we recorded the incidents. For example, about 2-3 weeks ago, in Techiman, I sat with teams of our police units who just before 6 p.m. were just about to set off in escorting passenger buses in the northern corridor.
I see.
So in engaging them and talking with them, and one of them calls me very frequently, I am able to appreciate that capacity, but I'm able to also talk about the sustainability of it in terms of how this gradually might not be happening with the police escorting these buses, but their presence enough would have discouraged people who take arms raw from continuing to do so. So I see that as a capacity.
And that's a good one.
And that's a good one. But when I see the continuation, if you look, for example, in the area of the process of due processes of the Supreme Court, interestingly, as I sit with you this evening, the rhetoric politically, that for us was very worrying in January, February.
Are resurfacing, right?
No, no, they actually reduced. It looks like the more we got to the Supreme Court really now going into the activity
and the substance of
and the
what
substance
the
of
allegations are.
Exactly. There has been a pullback.
Both parties are beginning to tone down on on their rhetoric.
Yes, and that we have monitored. In this type of a discussion, you don't want to repeat what was said at what point, because then you are not helping in peace building. But if you looked at January particularly, and if you looked at February, my goodness, the rhetoric was unacceptable. But the more it dawned on the parties, and the more we advocated, don't forget we advocated that it is the obligation of the parties first to impress upon their followers, particularly where pressure groups were set up, to inform them that due process is not in your hand. It is not the amount of rhetoric that makes the Supreme Court judges to behave differently. So why don't we all accept and submit ourselves to that process? And I think that one positive element about the live telecast is that people are seeing this, and many of the people you have interacted with, particularly lawyers, have talked about the transparency. They've talked about how this is not a mystery. And one good component is that it has made people to relax. And those with the expertise who are lawyers are the ones engaging with the judges. And so all we need to do now is to be patient, to be calm, and let this process go to its logical conclusion.
Have you thought or done any work about the repercussions or consequences of a final outcome if the Supreme Court rules in favor of whichever it rules? Have you done any work on how that will be accepted by the broader society, by the political parties involved, and everyone else?
The preparation to that work has started, but it required monitoring what is currently happening. And on Monday, there is a second meeting of the Civic Forum Initiative, which brings quite a number of organizations. It is coordinated. The Secretariat is in the Institute of Democratic Governance. There is WANEP, there is CDD Ghana, there is a Catholic Secretariat, the Muslim Council, Trade Union, Christian Council. All these bodies form the Civic Forum Initiative. The preparatory meetings, the study, and what we can do to contribute has already started. However, we continue making it clear that don't, as a politician, go around, agitate violence and create hostility, and then turn around and say, civil society, what are you doing? Come and make sure that there is peace. When you know what you are doing, and then you are calling on us.
But I mean, do I deduce from what you're saying and all the work you say you're doing that perhaps civil society is worried?
We are not necessarily worried. And let me say
perhaps
this.
you are too worried?
No. I wouldn't say so. As a matter of fact, if you look at the key civil society organizations in Ghana, they are very calm. Each of these institutions are organizing very interesting programs. For example, tomorrow, CDD Ghana is organizing one of their brand public lectures. In other words, civil society is going to the structural issues and not diverted by what you see as proximate. For example, for us, if there are issues that we need to change, they go structurally. So there is a unanimity of how, for example, we institute the type of democratic reforms in which our body politic is compelled to understand the language of working together and negotiating as part of what we call taking away the winner takes all. Let me give a quick example. Why has Kenya made such a dramatic progress? It's because Kenya learned from their mistake to establish a constitution that compels political parties to know how to work together. If you look at the greater Nairobi province, the Orange Democratic Movement, which is the leading opposition party, won the governorship of the Nairobi province. In fact, there are 47 governors, so their provinces are now led by governors. For us, we have 10 regions.
Yeah.
So what they did was, what they call province, which is our region, they elected governors. The ruling party, which is the coalition of Jubilee, won some governors, but the opposition, which was the court coalition, won a number of those governors.
I see.
So the ruling party has no choice
than to work with
the opposition. Now, that choice is a compulsion of a constitutional arrangement.
But we don't have such constitutional arrangements in Ghana.
We don't have it. So what you see happening is that one of the first meetings of President Uhuru Kenyatta was to meet with all the 47 governors. Intuitively, he knows that in that room, not all the 47 governors
support him.
Yes. Because he knows that a majority of them are even from the opposition. But his political skills as a leader, to be able to work with them, is now what is going to make the difference of his leadership character and quality.
Do you think our political leaders have this skill you are referring to?
And that is why civil society is advocating that those types of constitutional arrangements at their root is what responds to what we see currently in terms of the intolerance, which is the immediate outcome of the winner takes all. So that you don't talk about the winner takes all in terms of a post-election scenario. You go back to the root and ask yourself what constitutional arrangements minimizes a winner takes all scenario, which inversely increases intolerance. So that at the end of the day, we are looking at the long term. And that's the brilliant work of our own patriotic countryman, Kofi Annan, who led the African Union panel of mediators. Because if you remember, Kofi Annan's entry into Kenya had 3 phases. The immediate, which was the cessation of the hostilities. 1,300 people had been killed. But he then also proposed the medium term and the long term. This long term is the new constitution. And I'm so optimistic that this constitution is one of the best in Africa that the Kenyans have produced. It compels all the details of how you negotiate. It in itself fights corruption. Currently, the governor of Nairobi, Mr. Kidero, has asked for the dismissal of a key number of civil servants who were caught in corruption, but because of the political, so to speak, a situation, you could not deal with it. But he wants to succeed as the governor of Nairobi as the basis of demonstrating how his party is doing well.
He's an elected governor.
He's an elected governor.
So if he doesn't perform, they kick him out.
They kick him out. And so it's in our interest that we appreciate why ownership of leadership through elections, even at local level, is in the hands of the people. Because the people now will determine whether or not you are there the next time. And so one of the ways of looking at it is, let's assure ourselves that we are going to go through this, but after we go through...
Are you confident of that? That we are going to go through this?
We are going to go
and
through
with the
this.
smoothness that you describe? Or you don't anticipate that it's going to be entirely smooth?
Let me tell you, you see, interestingly, Ghanaians did not fall from Mars in January 2013. The majority of Ghanaians know what happens when you go to court. The majority of Ghanaians know that when you go to court, somebody will win and somebody will lose. To that extent, there is that awareness. The challenge is when political activists are mobilized with a certain type of language that generates hostility and intolerance.
And there is a lot of that type of mobilization.
Yes, but I want to be optimistic that towards the end of March and in this April, we have seen a toning down. And your platform should be the opportunity to encourage even more of that. Let us see the political leaders. You see, sometimes in this discussion, we are not so specific. But let me say this. On Monday, let's not dismiss the fact that the General Secretary of the ruling party, the National Democratic Congress, made a statement that if the police see anybody in the Supreme Court premises wearing a party T-shirt of his party,
or causing trouble, he should be arrested.
He should be arrested. That for me is positive. And I'm not saying this because, and I have gotten to the point in which...
But there was a negative twist. The negative twist was that he suspected that perhaps elements of the opposition, that is the NPP, could be infiltrating their own members and pretending to be members.
And I totally agree with you on that, particularly when there's no empirical proof. But then the other side can also make the same appeal without the last element. But what that means is that if all the supporters...
But the other side has not made that appeal yet. You think they should?
I think they should. Because then what it means is, when you go and cause trouble, don't say that your party encouraged you. Because the security people will arrest you and say, we don't care which party you belong. And in any case, your party leaders are saying that you should be arrested because you are causing trouble. Because there's a certain psyche that when I am doing mischief and I am caught by the police,
I am untouchable because I belong to party A or B.
Will put pressure and I'll be treated differently. We need to get out of that. And that's why it is significant when political parties speak to their own supporters that you cannot be unruly. Because if you misbehave, we will be the first to hand you over to the police. Now, is it 100%? No. So I'm not worried that even when the leaders make positive statements, you then see elements that might not be satisfactory. But we are going there.
But that is progress.
That is progress. And sometimes in the nature of how we respond to challenges, we sometimes are overbearingly looking for 100% results. I think that if you look at the past 3 months, we are beginning to be much better in handling this Supreme Court process than we saw in January. In January, we were much more worried. But today, I think we are a bit more relaxed.
My name is Stephen Enti, and you're watching PM Express. I haven't even taken a breath, and I must say you can join us. Send your text 1760 to all networks, and then you can post your comments on our Facebook walls, facebook.com/JoyNewsOnTV, Joy News, and then if you're active on Twitter, you can send us a tweet on Joy News on TV, and we'll be glad to read them. I'm still here with Emmanuel Bombande, and we're discussing ONEP's National Human Security Early Warning Brief, especially in connection with the various threats, as they put it, or incidents that have been recorded over the past 3 or 4 months, from January to March. So, Mr. Bombande, let's now zone in a little away from the politics and talk about the most important. I mean, on this pie chart, we have the disastrous rainstorm taking up to about 32%. I mean, this is a very important threat, I would say.
Yes.
Maybe I shouldn't say important, but this is very threatening.
Yes.
So why is it that we still have a lot of carnage on our road, and why is it that there is no effective policy to address these things? And day in and day out, we're losing valuable human resource capital.
Thank you so much. And to even underscore the point that you have just made, are we aware that more people die on our... I'm not trying to belittle in whatsoever the case might be, the threat, for example, of HIV/AIDS.
Or malaria.
Or malaria. But we are more Ghanaians. And physically, don't forget that
able-bodied people
are the ones moving a lot on the road.
Majority of the workforce.
We are losing more Ghanaians on the roads than even these big maladies that are more threatening. And very quickly, we have too many defective vehicles on our road. Some of them, particularly in the night, with our tailgate lights, that make them very dangerous on the road. Not to mention that because many of these vehicles, particularly the big trucks, are defective, they break down easily on our roads and are left in very awkward positions. And a lot of the accidents, people drive into them. Yeah. And because of the impact, many people die instantly. That was the case of a headlong in the northern region, in Walwale, in January. And we're talking about one incident, 24 people dead.
Pathetic, very pathetic.
Then the indiscipline on our roads. The indiscipline on our roads. To the extent that when you were talking about where are we making the progress, the police progress seems not to even be scratching the surface. And that is why, for example, we support the on-the-spot fines. And the on-the-spot fines can be prudently arranged. When people begin to know that when I'm caught driving recklessly, 50 Ghana cedi immediately is going to leave my pocket. Otherwise, I cannot continue driving. It will begin to change behavior. For far too long, we've talked about on-the-spot fines, on-the-spot fines. And if the moment government is getting near with that policy directive for the police to implement, you begin to see people talking about, no, it's not going to work. Let us try it. Then evaluate it. We've not even tried it. And the moment the police begin to
already say it won't work.
It won't work. It's that type of
perhaps
attitude.
there's good reason for us to have our doubts. I mean, there is no reliable address systems when an offender, you catch an offender committing a traffic offense and you give him a ticket and he decides not to pay and he goes away. You might possibly not find him again. Those things. I mean, I remember speaking to the police officials and these were real concerns they raised.
In our context, you pay on the spot. But the receipts should be so well done, like the VAT receipts, that you cannot forge those receipts to give it on the road. And you pick your receipt, and when you are picking your receipt, you verify the duplicate is there. So the police who took that money is going to return that money to the government chest. I'll even go further to say that some of that money should even be used now to motivate the police.
Well, the police said they won't take that money. They will give you the ticket, you go to a point to go and pay.
If that is the case, why not? But even more, as we go cashless, they should even give them these machines, and you can use your debit card or whatever to pay.
Instant.
We need that, so that when you collect the ticket and you don't appear to pay, we do not lose the money because you refuse to go and pay. But this is a subject for more scrutiny, and the police, they have the expertise. They should be able to come out with the type of mechanism that is the best. We should be able, of course, we have the Road Safety Management Commission that is trying to move big trucks that are broken on the roads. But that is not yet effective because on the highways in the hinterland, these big vehicles cannot be all around to pull those vehicles out. We should be very assertive in controlling big articulated trucks, whether with foreign registered numbers or Ghanaian numbers, that have a maximum load limit beyond the axle load, that are that intrude the safety on our roads, and you name it. But if you go to that level, we cannot say that we cannot improve the safety and protection of the people of Ghana on Ghanaian roads. Because the pattern now is that as the roads are improving, the accidents are also increasing.
More reckless driving.
That is unacceptable. Even in the disasters that are natural, we in our preparation can even prevent natural disasters. Now, leadership at our regional levels, at our district levels, should make it compelling for us to plant the type of trees that serve as windbreaks, particularly in communities where there are households.
And these should be planned.
And these should be planned so that we are dealing with the immediate, but we're also dealing with the medium to long term of how storms are not going to be causing havoc. If you now go to the readings on the impact of climate change, these natural disasters through rainstorms are not going to decrease. They are going to increase. And it's not just only Ghana or West Africa. That is the situation globally. We are in spring. But yesterday in Illinois, there was disaster. Look at the number of disasters in Europe and America. So Africa, it is the impact of climate change in our analysis of human security. How are we preparing to mitigate and prevent this as we see these things happening to us?
But how should we be preparing? That's the question.
And these are some of the points that we are making. That, for example, the discipline. Let me give an example. In the Dunkwa incident, we pray for the repose of the souls of all the, 19 young people who perished.
Yeah.
I feel so hurt. And every Ghanaian knows that we cannot lose those young boys.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I ask myself, how come that a grader operator who was telling them to move away because he has been given an assignment to cover the pit, they rather drove the grader operator away in order to go into the pit? And so the indiscipline in our youth. Our youth must understand that when you are told not to do certain things, it is for your own safety and protection. Of course, there were no policemen there to help the grader operator. So he had to leave. And when he left, 19 of them have died. So their indiscipline has led to the loss of their lives. And look at what they have left now in their families.
Yeah.
Bitterness, anger. So what kind of discipline do we bring to our youth? This is not the work of government. This is the work of our churches, our mosques, our civil society, civic commission, to be able to let people know that.
In our own individual selves.
And our own
we
individual
need to have
selves.
citizen responsibilities.
Exactly. When you wake up as a Ghanaian, Ghana needs you. But we are too reckless in our human behavior about our own safety. But nobody can come and protect you if you don't put in place the minimum conditions that at least guarantee your safety, so that now the environment, in terms of what government is doing, can help. If you go and drink excessively and you are driving at 160 kilometers per hour, you are risking not only your life, but the lives of other Ghanaians.
And your dependence.
So we need more education in this. I'm not saying it is not happening. I am not painting such a terrible picture. But when you are confronted with situations that are extraordinary, your response must also be extraordinary.
But there are also institutional lapses, really. I mean, all of these in discipline you talk about, if we have strong institutions which work and are able to enforce regulations, a lot of them will not happen.
Precisely. But when some of these institutions, number one, they are not doing what they must do to the optimum. But even the little that they do, we impede and become obstacles to what they must do. And it is for this reason that even the type of training that goes on, for example, it's not just training anymore to be a police officer, but the training to have the sense of patriotism that makes the police officer to be conscientious of how his or her duty is about building the state. So that you don't just see yourself as standing by the roadside, but you see how you are at the roadside to be part of the contribution of building the state. And that is the only way we can be able to make the significant progress that we need today.
That's the only way we can make the progress that we need today. My name is Chieftaincy. We'll take a short break, and please send in your text messages and your comments via Facebook and short code 1760. We'll be right back. Welcome back to PM Express. Mr. Babande, I know we've spoken about the incidents of disasters, rainstorm, etc. We've spoken a little about the political rule of law. Let's focus on the threats of chieftaincy and armed robbery, and then we'll wrap up for the evening. How is the chieftaincy threat looking like?
If you look at the chieftaincy threat, the reason why the threat is pervasive is because it is protracted. It is protracted because the chieftaincy in its character as an institution does not allow for a loser-winner arrangement. And so even yesterday, the Vice President talked about how the armed forces in their support to the police must be alert in making sure that these threats are manageable. What is required is to now go beyond that and institutionalize the dialogue processes. That now makes it possible for people to understand that the way you solve these types of problems that are protracted is your capacity to be able to sit down and through a meaningful dialogue engage in the type of consensus building that can come out of that. That we are doing in support of institutions of the state, in support of the National Peace Council. For example, in Konya Alabanyo, which is more land, that initiative has always been there. We had a setback. We are going to go back and enforce it. We are currently consulting with Bimobes and Kunkumbes to do similar in the Bimo Kunkumba area. I am convinced that during the year, we can be able to institutionalize dialogue in Dagmon to be able to enhance that. So one way of sustainable peace building where we talk about the threats of chieftaincy conflicts is the avenues, the initiatives, and the spaces that we create for genuine dialogue, for engagement of all parties.
And you say there's hope?
I think that even with the threats, the challenge is when we are not doing sufficient processes of dialogue rather than the threat in itself as it is pervasive. So I think that what we need to do there is create those spaces of dialogue and do more of that work in order that we are able to see a significant difference. And we can point to successes. There was a point in this country, people started to give up on my good hometown, Boku. But today, I was at home, and Boku is beginning to be a very good example.
It's beginning to come alive.
Yes, the young people are talking, and people are beginning to say that, look, we will rebuild our town, and we'll make it a great town again, as it used to be.
What about the threat of armed robbery?
The threat of armed robbery is one in which the police must sustain their current effort. In other words, we used to have a certain pattern in which the police would announce that for the Christmas period, we would increase our vigilance. For the Easter period, we will increase our vigilance. The armed robbery menace is one in which you sustain it throughout the year at a consistent level as you also observe the threats in terms of the equal response that you need to bring to bear. So that they do not even feel that at one point the police are raising their legs from the pedal. And for that matter, they can be more violent in their armed robbery and the police will calm down. It should be sustained continuously.
But is it a big concern? I mean, I've seen that it's a 10.15% of the threat percentage for your report. Is this a big deal?
In terms of the incidences, armed robbery has actually reduced. But the nature of armed robbery is such that it is one of the worst indicators for people to feel insecure and not protected in terms of their safety. Because there is an element too of the psyche.
Yeah.
You remember there was a point in which you needed to ask yourself whether after 9 p.m. you should go on the motorway. Yeah. You remember?
Yeah.
After 9 p.m. you needed to ask yourself, should I drive on the motorway? Today, people drive on the motorway and take it for granted that they will get to the end of the road because there are beautiful street lights and there is a police presence.
Yes.
Was it Saturday around 9 p.m.? For my own research, I drove on the motorway. There were 3 police vehicles in those Land Cruisers at different vantage points of the motorway, including the street lights. That is what I mean by sustenance. And so more police presence. And of course, that is beginning to happen because they are more equipped. So our advocacy is government, equip them more, motivate them more. And when people feel secure and protected, then the motivation and sense of Ghanaianness is increasing.
And even
businesses
productivity.
Flourish. Precisely.
Well,
Precisely.
Alukus from Tamale, you say that this case has actually tested the ingenuity of a real technocrat. No wonder it is tagged as a landmark case. Dr. Mahmoud Baumia, year 1 in a million. Well, and then this one from Kwekudria Obwasi says, this is the only legacy left by the Prof. Atamils. His pronouncement encouraged people to take the law into their own hands. Ohinejekum Kumasi says that, well, I want to skip that. An honorable minister has said it all. Is it right for the Chinese to mine and take the gold to their country and their capacity? Well, those were the only messages that came in, but we didn't exactly talk about Galamsey mining, and I'm afraid our time is up. So, Mr. Bombade, two things. I'll give you a few seconds to wrap up on this report. What I know there were a couple of recommendations. What are the most important which you would like to raise, and then we'll wrap up?
Very important at this point is the reinforcing the appeal to the two main political parties to bring their influence to bear on their activists to respect that due process in the Supreme Court should be allowed to take its course, because that is very current, and we have made that recommendation. And I think the others we talked about.
Thank you very much. Emmanuel Bombande is Executive Director of West African Network for Peace Building WANEP. My name is Stephen Enti, and thanks for making time with us. Thanks for sending in your text messages. Join us again tomorrow for another interesting edition of PM Express Personality Friday, where we'll have Dr. Reku Brobe coming on. Good night.